Good afternoon, it's Thursday, February 22nd, Senate Institutions. We're gonna spend some time with the Green Mountain Club Long Trail Protection. Michael DeBonis, Executive Director of the Green Mountain Club's here. Come step on up to the table, sir. And just tell everybody for the record who you are, or tell us what you'd like to tell us.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Mike DeBonis. I'm the Executive Director of the Green Mountain Club. Thank you, Chairman Eagles and members of the committee for creating the time to have me speak with you today.
Yeah.
I provided an overview of the Green Mountain Club and Long Trail Protection Program in my annual report, so I won't go through all of that today. But I will provide a quick summary and provide a couple updates on some successes.
Yep.
And report back on work that was supported by the General Assembly, and talk a little bit about the summer and winter floods and the impact of the trail, and kind of what the Green Mountain Club is doing and kind of what we've learned. So a quick summary of Long Trail Protection Campaign. We launched the campaign in 1986. And over the last 38 years, the club has worked with the General Assembly, private landowners, the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, and partner organizations to protect over 88 miles of Long Trail. We've conserved more than 25,000 acres of land and added 16,700 acres to the Vermont State Forest System. In that time, the General Assembly has contributed over $3.5 million in appropriations funding through the Capitol bill for Long Trail protection, which is amazing. The Long Trail Protection Campaign owes much of its success to the General Assembly and to certain individuals that have made protecting the Long Trail a priority. Like Governor Howard Dean and Senator Bob Gannett before him, Senator Dick Maas has taken on the mantle of protecting the Long Trail for future generations. This had a huge impact. Here's just a couple highlights. The creation of the Long Trail State Forest, acquisition of over 5,500 acres around JP and Black Falls Basin, the Lamoille River footbridge, and the completion of the 100-year goal of securing permanent passage of the Long Trail across the Winooski River Valley. This massive project required multiple land deals for multiple years, construction of miles of new trail, crossing an interstate, a state highway, a railroad, and building a steel suspension bridge over the Winooski River. That all happened. The senator likes to say that he isn't a hiker. Maybe so, but Senator Maas has worked as hard for the Long Trail as any hiker or volunteer, and it's earned the admiration of generations of hikers who walked the footpath in the wilderness. I'm sorry he's not here today, but I just publicly recognize the impact because it's
He's very
significant.
He's very low key about that. He's fought hard for that. I mean, from all trails. I mean, transportation from the 93 miles of
White
White Valley Rail Trail, and we have the opportunity, and I wish he was here for the fight, but it's something that I'm going to take up, is from St. Johnsbury to the Connecticut River. That section of the railroad trail that's there. And of course, we're always looking to always tell the area of Burke Mountain on the mountain bike trails that they just don't ask enough, because that is something that they're taking on themselves, it seems. But again, I think that you've hit it kind of on the nail, that the legislature is in favor of that type of stuff. And sometimes you can have an advantage when you come in a building if somebody likes you or not. And I think that certainly the trail systems in the state are very well loved, and people like them. They see the value in protecting, and so yeah, we're glad to have you here.
Yeah, and I think it's taking a long-term commitment. These things don't happen overnight, and it takes vision. I mean, I wish I had the vision. I didn't come up with the idea. I'm just here for a small piece of the journey. But it's that long-term vision. It's that long-term commitment to these institutions in the state, and that doesn't happen everywhere. So I think give yourselves a lot of credit for having that vision and kind of stick-to-itiveness to get it done.
I don't want to get you off your topic, but we've been going to do that once in a while. How many miles are in private of the Long Trail are in private hands? Do you know that?
So the unprotected miles, about 6 miles left.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought we were down under 10 miles.
Yeah, and it's about 14 different property owners. It's a long-term game. We work with only willing landowners. So you gotta be at the right position. People have to be in the right place to want to do it. and it's all about relationships. And it's the same with land conservation. So we're continually working to identify opportunities. And this year we don't have a property that we're coming to the committee with the General Assembly with for support, but we're reporting on what we have done and what we're currently working on right now. And once one becomes available, you'll see.
Well, I think it's too bad because they've always been kind of fun and they're always have seemed to have a complexity. Senator Harrison last year, her first bill she reported ever was that part of it right there, and I was like, oh man, couldn't we found some low hanging fruit for her? But she knocked it out of the park with the way she did it. And, but yeah, so it was kind of neat.
Yeah, I'm happy to report on a couple things that we did get done with support from the assembly.
Yep.
So if we go to that first slide, parking lot. So last year, I reported on the acquisition of the Judavine Brook Headwaters. So this is in Johnson. This is a small parcel. We used the General Assembly provided a capital appropriation of $85,000 in fiscal year 22. This small property conserved about 100 feet of long trail. It filled a really important gap of unprotected land. Part of the deal was building a parking lot off Plot Road in Johnson for the long trail. And this got done. The Department of Forest Parks and Recreation built this parking lot last year. It holds 10 cars. It's got an access trail right to the long trail. This area is used by hunters and hikers. A lot of folks use it all season. It's just a beauty of a parking lot. And it's great to have that asset for public access to public lands and outdoor recreation. So that got done, part of that project.
Whose land is it?
So it's owned by Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. Yeah. So this is all part of Long Trail State Forest.
And is that a before and after picture or?
Just two different sides.
Oh,
yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish they looked that good forever. That's like a brand new parking lot. It's a real
rocks.
Yeah, it's a real beauty.
Yeah.
And that's Plot Road that you see on the side there.
Okay.
And it's just so important to have good parking, not just convenience, but also to help adjacent landowners not be worried that people are gonna park on their space.
Right.
When you organize it,
Right. Yeah.
it's really important.
I mean, we spent a lot of time in Lake Willoughby, before they put parking lots in, and landowners were just upset. I mean,
Yes.
it was something out of a twilight zone to see that many vehicles, people trying to gain access to those trails and where to park, and now they put parking in, and it's calming the community down, and,
Yeah.
Instead of, being angry at those people that are there,
Right.
now that they're managed, it's made it a better situation for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. We go to that next slide. So we're currently working on another property right in the same area as the Judavine property in that parking lot. We just got under contract to conserve a 12-acre property off Plot Road. This will protect 300 feet of Long Trail Treadway. Again, another small but mighty project. This, once it's conserved, it's called the Deer Camp Tract. It's that little one in the blue polygon. Once it's conserved, it'll become part of the Long Trail State Forest. And we're actually able to use money from the Long Trail Restricted Fund. There are a couple parcels, state land, that were transferred from Coolidge State Forest to the Green Mountain National Forest. And that freed up the money to be able to conserve this property, so $85,000. So we didn't have to ask for a capital appropriation from the General Assembly for this one. We were able to use money that was generated for long-term protection by working with our partner, the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. So a nice victory there. If we go to the next slide, this is just a close-up of the Deer Camp Tract. So that blue part right on the road, so there's road access. This is going to become part of Long Trail State Forest. Will be managed by the Department of Forest Parks and Rec. We get that little piece of the Long Trail protected, so it closes a gap. The Department of Forest Parks and Recreation gets some more acreage added to the Long Trail State Forest, and they get road access, which helps them with their long-term management.
Which one's the Long Trail? Is it the yellow or the blue?
The yellow.
What's the blue?
The blue is just the dotted blue line is the buffer for the long trail
Okay,
that we try to protect,
okay, yep.
that buffer, and then the kind of the neon blue is just the property boundary.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Fish and Wildlife the major property owner of the Long Trail property?
It's kind of split up. I kind of think of it in thirds. So the Long Trail is 272 miles from Massachusetts to the Canadian border. The bottom third is mostly US Forest Service land. So federal government up to basically, Mount Aid, Killington, that area. The middle part is mostly state land, and that's mostly Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. So A&R land.
Yep.
There's some other state lands in there, but mostly Forest Parks and Rec. And then the northern part is a mixed bag of private land, some municipal land, some state land. And that's where the majority of the Long Trail Protection work is kind of focused, is in the northern part. When this started in the 80s, there was, most of that land up there was unprotected. It was all kind of handshake deals. Comes been around for,
They didn't have enough realtors. There you go.
yeah, it comes been around for 100 plus years, and those handshake deals, it's how most recreation is done in the state. Works really well until it doesn't. So those
Yeah.
things start changing hand, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do. And the club decided to do long-term protection, which I think, it's worked out well, but it's not easy.
So I'm betting that, over the 100 years, sometimes the trails changed some, but now with down to just 6 miles of being that's not protected, it's probably pretty highly unusual that trail actually changes.
That's right. Yeah, it changes a lot less. We're still working on some areas where the trail is in a location where it's maybe not the best location from landowner relations or for the hiking experience or from like an environmental quality perspective, and moving that trail to higher ground or more sustainable ground would be appropriate. That requires land protection, coordination with landowners. You've got to build the trail. So there are still some of those projects, but not as many as we had in the early days. I think of you probably hear from a lot of folks that are developing rec trails in Vermont. There's kind of an arc of development, and the club is on the far end of that. The trail's built. It's largely maintained, and now we're working to make it last forever. There's some folks that are in that early phase of building it. So they're working out land deals. They're trying to stitch it together. They're building new trail. And in Vermont, we have rec trails and organizations on every part of that spectrum. Club's been around since 1910, so we're largely on the maintained, protected side.
So Michael, I know in my area, I'm from the Rutland district, that the Appalachian Trail and the Long Trail kind of are together for a little bit of time and going over Pico Mountain and Killington. From there north, what counties does the Long Trail go through? Does it go to Addison County next, or take a kind of a eastern?
Yeah, it goes straight up. So it'll hit Addison County, it'll go through Washington County.
Okay,
Cuts a little bit of Chittenden County, goes into Lamoille County.
so Caledonia.
I'd have to look at the map.
Yeah, I don't see it going over that far.
Yeah, it hits really the ridge lines
Center,
of the Green
yeah,
Mountains.
okay.
Yeah.
And for the people that are watching and all that, who determined that trail to be in there? I mean, somebody must have said, here's a trail. Was it an Indian trail, or was it
Yeah.
is that what it was?
Well, it's a gentleman named James Taylor, not the James Taylor,
Right.
but James P. Taylor, who's an educator at Saxon's River, and he used to take his students out hiking, and he had this vision for a trail, a long distance hiking trail,
Okay.
the length of the state of Vermont, connecting resources. Now, there were some existing trails, Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump, but there was not a connecting trail. So he had the vision, actually drew a map, went out and sold the idea. And then over a period of 20 years, he formed Green Mountain Club. Over a period of 20 years, they built it. And now you have a 272-mile long trail. And then there's a couple 100 miles of side trails that connect to it. So it's all told about 500 miles of trail that the Green Mountain Club manages in the state of Vermont.
From Saxon's River. That's in my district.
Yeah,
It's a very small town. But
I know
this
it
is pretty
well.
close.
Vermont Academy's
Yeah,
there.
oh yeah. You know their fields.
yeah.
So
He is a
That's really
legend.
cool.
What's the highest point on it and the lowest point?
So the highest point is Mount Mansfield.
Yeah.
That's the highest point in the state. And then if you go to the next slide, show you the lowest point. So this is
Whoops.
this is the Long Trail just north of the Winooski River. Winooski River is the lowest point. This is after the July
Yeah.
floods.
Right.
There is a trail under there, but this area had massive flooding. And, we're able to get in there and clean it up, but that's the lowest point that it flooded.
So it's passable now?
It's passable,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, kind of pivoting to some of the flood work, I would say this is thankfully not the norm. There's certainly parts, low-lying parts of the trail that flooded. But if you go to the next slide. This is mostly what you see. So this is Old Job Trail, Mount Tabor. You saw parts of the trail. Some folks said, well, it looked like the trail aged 25 years over the weekend. You had scouring, erosion, massive erosion. The water bars that divert water on the trail filled up. Some parts, I imagine the brook here got pretty high and just scoured out the side of the bank and the trail sloughed off. So we saw a lot of this. There's probably dozens and dozens of places along the trail that were damaged. It's not going to prevent anyone from hiking it, but it needs to be fixed. It is probably going to require us to reroute that portion of the trail along the way.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so that's, I think what we were fortunate, we didn't lose any major infrastructure. You can go to the next slide. So this is Clarendon Gorge Bridge near Rutland.
Yep.
It's been around in the 80s. Beautiful spot right over the gorge. Great swimming hole. If you look to the right by those two folks, we saw massive scouring on the abutment. We didn't lose the bridge, so it's structurally sound, but it's been around for decades and we've never seen that kind of erosion from storm events. So I think that's the norm, right? Like these things were built with a certain flood stage in mind, and as we're building new infrastructure, we have to keep that in mind. Are we building for not only the storm events we're seeing now, but what we're going to see in the future? But we didn't lose it, thankfully.
So to fix that, do you just drag a bunch of dirt next to the abutment?
It's still on bedrock, so it's still structurally sound. I imagine we might have to extend that footing down to prevent further erosion, but it's on solid structure. But if you lose another rock there, I think we're in trouble.
Right where that gentleman's standing, what is that? What is that? It's along the slide of some sort, is it?
That's the abutment.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the bridge support. There's a hiker actually walking across the top of it.
Yeah.
They have these things, gabions, that are rocks in metal, cages kind of, that are really good for stuff like
Yeah.
That's
that.
a great idea.
Yeah, we can go to the next one.
Whoops.
So these are actually mixed up. This one on the left is Gulf Stream Bridge in Woodstock. And this one we did lose. This brook stream flooded significantly and the footing for that bridge got completely washed out. It's unsafe. And so folks are going to have to, it's closed. It'll need to get replaced. This is part of the Appalachian Trail. So we're able to use federal funding to support that. And then the Homerstone Brook Bridge in Wallingford got hit pretty hard in the July floods. This is just a timber pedestrian bridge, but got pretty well washed out and will need to be replaced. And as we do that, we'll think about, do we replace it in kind with something else, or do we need something bigger? There's probably some crossings where you don't put a bridge.
Yeah.
You can't afford to put one in and have to replace it every year. So maybe it's a ford at that point, and people are just gonna get their boots wet. These are the kinds of things that we have to think about when we're managing in this kind of environment. We can go to the next one. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think there are massive impacts from the flood and people lost property and life, and that's the most important thing. Recreation is not the most important, but it is part of the state. And I think there's some bright spots. We have been rebuilding the Burroughs Trail on Camel's Hump for the last couple of years. This is state land, working with the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. This is a very popular trail, couple miles. It's pretty bad condition, and the plan was to rebuild it from top to bottom and using local rock work. So mostly building stone steps and drainages. After the July floods, I remember talking with the director of field programs. We were wondering, what if Burroughs Trail was gone? What if it literally got washed away? We didn't know. And once we got crews out there, not only wasn't it gone, the work held up.
Yeah.
So this work was done with climate change in mind, so with massive storm events in mind. It was designed to move water off the trail, and it held up. I don't think we can do this everywhere. It's too expensive. But areas that are the most vulnerable, areas that get the most public use, something like this is something that we need to consider if we want to keep these trails long-term. And I think it was a real bright spot. You probably see it across the state, areas where we've made those investments in infrastructure and we've sized them right, they held up, which is pretty great.
And the value of trees,
Yeah, value of
because
trees.
they hold riverbanks too.
Uh,
Can I ask a couple?
Absolutely, please.
So just a little bit about emergency things happening on the trail. Do you, if there's a storm coming that could be dangerous, do y'all let people know, or do you just assume that they'll figure that out on their own?
Most of the time they'll figure it out on their own. Most of the hikers that are out there are pretty tapped into social media.
Okay,
I think for something that's really big like this event, we have a social media presence. We did put information out to let people know. And someone did actually lose their life on the trail during the floods at a river crossing. So, fairly significant consequences with extreme weather events like this.
is there cell service everywhere?
It's spotty. It's Vermont.
So like I know, I would expect it'd be kind of nice to not have cell service in some ways, but then if you want to call emergency
Yeah.
folks.
It's better than it used to be, and a lot of folks carry a personal communicator.
Oh, the radio things.
Yeah, and they can communicate that way. And there's apps that people use that can help them communicate.
That's good. And then just one other thing, just do you use VYCC, the Vermont Youth Conservation?
Yeah. So they actually have done work on that Burroughs Trail.
Oh, okay.
So they'll do contract work in the state, and we've had their crews out.
Cause I hear great things about it.
Yeah.
I've worked with them in their.
Yeah, I worked there when I was much younger, and they have.
Look what it led to.
Yeah, that's right. That's where it led. And yeah, they do try to work around the state, plus a bunch of other things and do a great job.
Good.
How many members in the club?
We've got about 10,000.
And does sort of each piece of it have different people looking after it, or?
Yeah, it's got this interesting structure, like a chapter. They call them sections. So there's 14 sections.
Okay.
Each one maintains a certain piece of trail. And so we have a Killington section, and they have their section of trail, and all up and down the state. And then we have individual adopters that will adopt a shelter or a piece of trail. And then we have professional trail crews. And it's the three of them combined that help us manage the whole system. It's too big just to have one person do it or one group do it. You really need that effort.
How many full-time people?
We've got about 16 full-time staff at our headquarters in Waterbury. I'll wrap up here. The final point I wanted to make, and it's kind of a point in a thank you. As I think about the floods and think about the club's work to maintain the trail in the face of climate change, we're facing, I think, fairly significant damage from the flood events. It's going to take years and tens of thousands of dollars, but we're going to do it. We're going to get it done. And I think the reason we're going to get it done is because we've been able to protect the land. It really changes the game for us because we're able to work with the state. We're able to raise public and private dollars to put into these trails. It's much harder to do it if it's not protected or if it's on private land. It's hard to secure those dollars. So the fact that the General Assembly all those years ago had this vision and commitment now has put the Long Trail in a position to be maintained in climate change. I don't think we were thinking about climate change in the 80s. I certainly wasn't. But that Long Trail protection, the land protection is probably one of the biggest reasons or assets that we have that's going to help us fight climate change impacts on these trails. So I just think it's a great story. And I think when we think about competing uses, there's always hard choices in budgets, but the supporting the assets in the land is a real winner because it pays dividends and then it enables us to support these resources in perpetuity. So thank you so much for your support and thank you for listening to me today.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Michael.
We like these little field trips that we take.
Yeah.
And this is
From our
kind of gets
seats.
us off the
Yeah.
numbers and we appreciate what you do and it's always nice to know that when we expend money out there in the community that we get such good results. So we appreciate you very much. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I have one offspring who as a young adult hiked the Long Trail in the middle of COVID. I think it saved him because he was doing college from his bedroom. He was not happy. but he went out and did the long
That's
trail.
amazing.
And then a couple of years later did the half of the Appalachian Trail
Oh, wow.
before he got injured. So
So
he will
serious, yeah.
complete that, but he was inspired by the long
Yeah.
trail. I think if he ever moves back to Vermont, it will be because of the experiences he had here.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew up here, but I think just really connecting to the land was important. And his older sister is now talking about doing long trail.
Oh, that's so cool.
So she also does not live in Vermont anymore, but she's determined to come back and
Yeah.
make it. So again, I think it's just so great to have that kind of resource
Yeah,
for
that's amazing. Yeah, I
all
think we're lucky.
Vermonters or wannabe Vermonters to connect with,
Yeah, what a great story.
think.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, thank you for coming in, appreciate it very much.
Thank you all.
That was a good minutes that we had here.
Thank you.
Well, we're gonna switch gears here, and we have everybody here as far as who wants to be here. Yep, come on up.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for coming. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Are you ready for me to start?
We are.
Absolutely, that's excellent. So for the record, I'm Karen Scott. I am the Chief Financial and Operating Officer of the Vermont State Colleges. And I was pleased to see you several weeks ago as part of the team, Berg
Yep.
and Chancellor Mauck visited you. And I'm here today to just give you a further update on the major maintenance, transformation planning and related projects that were funded as part of this current buy-in. And so I just want to take a moment, first of all, to just say thank you for the extremely generous support that you authorized for the Vermont State Colleges for the 24-25. And I want to share with you just a few things about the work that we've been doing with your investment dollars. There were 3 primary critical projects that were approved as part of last year's capital bill. That included structural renovations to address the building envelope at Vale Hall and Green Hall, exterior signage for Vermont State University, the VTSU facilities master plan, and other related major maintenance. And I'm pleased to give you some updates. First of all, as it relates to the permanent exterior signage for Vermont State University, we are pleased to say that it's all been constructed and it's now awaiting weather to help us do the installation. But they will be fully installed across all of our campus locations before commencement in May. So we're very excited by that. There is temporary signage in place at every location. So it does say Vermont State University everywhere you go, but we're looking forward to actually having the permanent signs in place. We're also really pleased with the progress we've been making on the facilities master plan. As part of that work, we've really prioritized the Vale and Green projects, which were critical aspects of it. As part of the space utilization, deferred maintenance, and program optimization work. And when that work concludes, as it relates to master planning, we will actually move forward with those elements of the projects. But we shared with you before that really maintaining our building envelope, especially our roofing systems, is really vital to the success of our buildings. And this summer, we actually installed new roofs on 4 buildings. And as you can imagine, buildings of our size and scope are expensive. And it was only through the possibility of having funds that you provide to us that we were able to actually make that work happen. We could not have been able to afford to do it without you. So we really want to say thank you. And we know that our students thank you because it's really vital to stop success. But in addition to that, in addition to those roof repairs, our utility infrastructure is also vital to our success. And so we made significant upgrades to some utility services. And one example is the replacement of a transformer for one of our buildings, which was quite a bit larger project than we'd anticipated. As you can see from some of these here, it wasn't just a matter of, take an old transformer out, put a new transformer in. We had to do some underground services work and related activities. But in most cases, our utility services for our buildings were constructed in the 1960s. So they are largely failing at this point. And so having the funds available from you in the legislature is vital to our success. But we recognize that you cannot provide all of the funds necessary in order to be able to complete all of the work we need to do on our deferred maintenance and other things. And so to that end, Vermont State University has already set aside $4.2 million to address its own deferred maintenance and related issues. And they're also actively seeking external funding in the form of grants and other opportunities to help with critical infrastructure. Now that often it's hard to find funders who will find replacement of things, but as we look at the expansion or the enhancement of buildings, that's where we are having some luck. And a key example of that is $6.3 million that we received in a federal earmark. That's allowing us to expand the nursing program
Nice.
at the Johnson location.
Nice.
That will actually allow us to not only expand nursing to that location, but it will also increase the pipeline for nursing graduates coming out of the state of Vermont. And one thing we know about nursing students that go through the Vermont State Colleges is the vast majority of them, over 80% of them, end up getting their license and remaining here in Vermont. So we're looking at about a 300 student increase overall in our nursing expansion program, and we're very excited about that prospect.
Are we up to about 1,000 right now with nurses?
We're at about 650, so we're
650.
looking at about 1,000.
Okay.
When is that going to happen?
So we are beginning that work right now. So we are looking at about a year from now when we can begin enrolling in that program. I
Yeah, I
believe.
think in the next couple of years.
So, and so we do know that it'll take us a while. That's with all things education. You build the beginning cohort and then you add on to it. But it'll take about 3 years once we've been able to start enrolling students in that. But we're very excited about
I'm very excited.
Yeah,
about
that's
that.
great.
Very
Well,
excited.
Can-
Great.
We have, the other committee I'm in is economic development, and there's you probably know, forgivable loans for, certain, degrees, and one of them is nursing.
Right.
And right now, I think it's only a couple of years, but we obviously should dovetail and,
Right.
extend that, because people are taking, advantage of it and really like it. And it
Absolutely.
pays you for staying in Vermont, and then it's a forgivable loan, so it
Exactly.
reduces your debt, which is really important.
But what we also know is that seats for nursing education
All right,
are.
they have
are
to get, they have to get the information
So,
first,
so
yeah.
we're trying to expand that pipeline so that we can expand the number of nurses that are coming through. And with the Vermont State Colleges, it's a laddered credential program. So individuals can come in and they can get a degree, a nursing degree at every level of their certificate, all the way up through Masters of Nursing, which is a really outstanding, and allows us to eventually, hopefully, be able to also educate some of our own nursing educators in the end,
Mm.
which is a huge issue for all nursing programs
Right.
here in the state of Vermont. So
I
we're
was gonna
very
ask you
excited.
about that. How are you coming as far as to, obviously, to stand up a program and to find another way to graduate 300 nurses, you have to have staff to do that. I mean, it's gonna be challenging right now you're competing with some pretty big places to bring those people in.
We are competing with big places for that. So Vermont State University is, they've done a few things. One is that it opened a master's in nursing program a few years ago at our Castleton location. It is a program that incumbent nurses, RNs, can take in order to be able to use an online program, to do an online academic program. So they can be an incumbent nurse working at a hospital or another facility and get to their MSRN, which is fantastic because it's also the credential that we need in order to be able to help hire nursing educators. So our hope and desire is that we can do a little bit of build our own here by helping to get the education in and starting to really build what that looks like. So it is a challenge. I know Vermont State University is really focused on that as an issue, but it's one that we're really committed to resolving because for all of us here in the state of Vermont, having access to high quality medical care, which really begins with the nurses, because they are that hands-on people.
Yeah.
That we really absolutely think that we need that. So we're very excited about that. And so it's something for us that we are taking really seriously, that ability to be able to not only seek funding from you, but the state, but also really to say, we have to bring resources to the table in order to be able to address that. And we heard that message loud and clear from you over the last several years. And we want to make sure that you hear from us that we take that very, very seriously in what we're doing.
What kind of relationship do you have with Copley Hospital if you're gonna stand up a program in Johnson? Is there any type of relationship there as far as student participation within the hospital?
Yes, there already is. So we run a small nursing cohort out of Johnson now. It's part of VTC's, formerly VTC's nursing programs. And so many students do have the opportunity to do their practicums at Copley Hospital, as well as the Manor, which is also located elsewhere. But we're also building out, as you probably know, we're building out nursing, and we actually completed that work with an EDA grant this past year at the Linden location
Yes.
to really try and be able to make sure that we can build a stronger pipeline in the Northeast Kingdom as well. Because we really understand that nursing is an issue throughout the state of Vermont. It's not just in the handful of
It's in the country, for sure.
be there. And we have a small state, and what we find best is that people from this area who are educated into the field of nursing, particularly adult learners, are ones who are more likely to stay and persist. They're already embedded in their communities.
I know of in the Linden area at NDRH, a program that brought in 7 young nurses, and I think I personally know 5 of them. And so they're local people, they're there, and so very happy that for right now. In fact, I had a great conversation a week ago with one of them that was down there.
Right.
And very happy to be in Vermont, really has no desires to go anywhere else. And I think I can say that for the 5 of them that I know, they're tickled right to death to be able to be in Vermont, go to work, practicing what they've learned, and be in the community that they're familiar with, they love, and host a family. So, yeah, I think they're on the right track with that.
It's absolutely vital, and as soon as possible where we can educate the people who already love their communities and want to stay here in these really vital and important fields, the more we should be that. So we're very excited about that, and we will continue to seek these opportunities to expand and do other things with resources that are not yours. We will still need you, and we will always need you, but we recognize that it needs to be a partnership as much as possible.
Well, we, certainly glad to hear that, because it is a partnership, and everybody has successful partnerships. Everybody feels like they have to have skin in the game, and that, and I think one of the questions as I was at Sophie Zadotny's ceremony, what was asked of me as by one of the directors, well, how can we always be assured to have the support of the legislature and available funding? And my answer was, well, you gotta be viable. You have to be viable. You have to be able to, in some parts in time, or at least a vast part of your structure, you have to be able to stand on your own. We understand what you do for the communities. We understand what you do to educate our population, which is very, very important, so we can compete with the world. But it has to be a partnership that everybody feels they have skin in the game, and that's a true partnership.
Absolutely. And I think that it's our ability to be able to focus on that across all of the Vermont State Colleges, the community college and Vermont State University, is vital to our ability to be successful moving forward. And that's what we've been really focused on from a transformative perspective since 2020. Our singular focus is making sure that we're meeting the needs of Vermonters in all of our communities, and doing that in a way that's sustainable and financially viable. And that's really been our focus. So turning to our facilities planning processes, with nearly 2 million square feet that we own and a reduced student enrollment population, we recognize that right-sizing our capital infrastructure is a critical part of building a bright and sustainable future for the Vermont State Colleges. From our studies, we really know that Vermont State University is overbuilt by about 30%, and that our campuses are not meeting the needs of today's students. With your support and funding, the Vermont State Colleges launched a master planning process in 2023 to evaluate our buildings and facilities within Vermont State University at the campus locations of Castleton, Linden, Johnson, Randolph, and Williston. The master plan process is receiving data from a really wide variety of sources, and it now really requires significant input from our faculty, staff, and students. So in this next phase of our facilities planning work, BTSU's president, Dave Berg, and his team will be using the time as an opportunity to gather insight into how well our facilities are working for today's students, so the ones that are here and enrolled today, as well as really starting to consider the needs of the students who will be with us 5 years, 10 years, and even 15 years from now. It's essential that this work be done in a really collaborative and intentional and strategic way, so that we can make sure that those voices that are here today are being heard, because that's what's most important, is who are the people here today, but also recognizing that as individuals, when I was in college 30 plus years ago, we won't mention how long, my needs were very different than of today's learners. Today's learners, many of our learners today are adult learners, and so they are learning in a very different way. Students are glued to cell phones. They're glued to technology in a different way. So their needs are different, and it's important that we really understand that by having that really strong interactive dialogue. So the master plan is really expected to identify priorities for real orderly growth and or divestment, and really needs to support Vermont State Universities and the Vermont State College's long-term and strategic visions. The process needs to establish and is expected to establish and support decision-making. And it needs to be directly in support of our academic priorities that defined by the university as part of the academic optimization, and will continue to be refined and defined as the university continues to complete its strategic planning and academic planning work. It also needs to support enrollment goals and objectives. And as you know, Senator Ingalls, it's really what are the enrollment goals and objectives for an individual location, and what makes sense for that location, for what those learners at that location are learning, and what the programs that are being taught there need. And it also needs to really look at the needs of the students that are there today, as well as the students of the future, because no master plan can really stand alone. We need to be thinking about where will we be well into the future. So we're using a lot of inputs from a variety of different sources, and the academic optimization plan that was completed last fall, enrollment and demographic trends and projections for Vermont, New England, and the Northeast. Our facilities condition assessments, which we have been updating. We had done some before the master plan, and we're continuing to do that right now. Our academic teaching and residential space utilization information, as well as critical input, as I've noted, from faculty, staff, students, alumni, and our community members. Some of the critical inputs are really purely factual, and they're data points that we really just need to understand. For example, how has enrollment changed at each campus? And what's the level of residential occupancy at each location? And how has that changed over time? But there's also information about Vermont itself and New England. So our distribution of population, the demographics, their median age, the broadband locations, what's the highway system look like? Where are the individuals? So that we can really better understand where our Vermonters are and what the needs might be for that particular location. There's demographic information that's available from here in the state that will help us predict what's the age going to look like in this general area, maybe 50 miles around an existing location. What does that look like? And are the needs different? Do we need to really be looking at that differently? But it really gets back to making sure that that's all in alignment with the academic, strategic, and defense plans. We're also taking into consideration really detailed information about each campus. And this is what many people would most frequently think of as the facilities master plan. So it's things like the campus layouts and transportation and parking, utilities, the topography, the hydrology. And they all have an impact on what's going on, but it's the totality of all of this that will help shape some of the recommendations that may come from our professional master planners. But all those data points are really meaningless without input from the Vermont State University community. So President Berg and his team will really be beginning that dialogue very soon with faculty, staff, students, and the campus communities to understand really truly the needs of today's students in those conversations and really help kind of try and understand where it is that we're headed. No one has a crystal ball for what the future will look like, but we can start to make some predictions about how things could look. And these will inform the concepts that the president's team will be recommending for future investments and consideration. And those concepts will be then estimated and a return on investment will be evaluated. And the very best of those ideas will come forward to our board of trustees for consideration for potential funding. As part of these plans, we will also be looking, and I know Avail and Green Hall were a part of last year's capital bill. But to avoid spending money twice, we didn't just leap into those projects. We could have, but we really felt that as we were leaping into the master plan, we really felt like making sure that these investments in the way that we had initially proposed them still made sense. And so as part of the master plan, we are continuing to review that and they will be prioritized really highly as we move forward. So in closing, I just want to emphasize that our facilities planning work is rooted in the achievement of 3 goals. First, we're really committed to a process that includes input from the Vermont State University community. Transformation has really brought about many necessary changes for our system and the institutions that we serve. And these have been important steps in our path towards financial sustainability. That it has been our singular focus. But they have been very difficult to implement. And we know that that has caused challenges for our community, our faculty, our staff, our students, and the communities that surround us. So the academic and administrative optimization plans that we announced last fall are also still just being implemented and across our system. And so we want to ensure that we're allowing time for our communities to continue to adjust to these changes while pursuing a facilities planning process that's intentionally robust, inclusive, and strategic. We also know that we have a significant amount of deferred maintenance across our campuses, and that we have work to do to right size and modernize our facilities. So addressing these are an important part of our facilities master planning process to ensure that our students have a rural higher education experience that continues to be and meet the essential needs and for the vitality of the state of Vermont. So we look forward to this next phase in the facilities master planning process and keeping you updated as we move along. So I look forward to answering any questions.
Well, I think you're really on the right track as far as aligning yourself with the community. So I'm not gonna think of Lindenville as if we are successful in transitioning the Salem Airport to Beta. And they do with what they have done everywhere they've been. You know, I look at some of the buildings that you have and maybe, you know, they're gonna need transitional housing. They're gonna need some of these, you know, some of these places to house these workers. I mean, I could easily see Linden coming into a situation to where, you know, 300, 400, 500 people that they would want to bring in and to do with what they've done everywhere else. So and I imagine, you know, as we go around and look at where these other facilities are in all of our communities, that, you know, there's certainly need for space, certainly need for housing and all of that, but very encouraged to hear about the nursing part of it. Hopefully, we can start hitting some more home runs. As I remember the universities, and I apologize, everybody hears the same story over and over and over again, but when I was in business employing people out of Linden, they were coming and working part-time for me, and you know, they were into communications, radio broadcasts, meteorology, and then you would go down into the Calvin part of it, and you go into Johnson, and they were cranking out teachers and left and right, and I mean, they all worked very, very well, and they weren't all trying to be all competing with these small liberal arts colleges throughout New England that have been there for 200 years, that have bigger endowments than we have, and they can survive anything. So to be able to partner with the communities and right size fit not only the institutions, but even the students, for what, today's demanding, it could be anything. I mean, the nursing you hit a home run with, and hopefully we can find some more home runs to hit. And be able to be nimble enough to act on those so that, we can, you just build these universities to fit what the communities need and what the world needs. So we're your biggest fans. We're rooting for you. I've got to say that I like the communication better than at any time ever. I've only been here for a short amount of time, but I've always had these your colleges in my communities, and I like the communication and hope it continues. And I hope we continue along the path of prosperity for all, and everybody feels like it's a great partnership. So, yes.
Do you have an idea of what the bill for the deferred maintenance is gonna be?
So overall, our deferred maintenance is estimated at about $200 million system wide. That's about what it is. And that's largely building envelope and building systems, so it's not upgrades to the facilities themselves. With a 2 million square foot portfolio, that's not an outrageous amount of deferred maintenance, but it is huge. In higher education, it is certainly not an atypical volume of deferred maintenance. However, when we look at the deferred maintenance studies, and we worked with a firm called Gordian last year and the year before to evaluate how that is, our deferred maintenance, in order to just keep on it, we would need to spend about $9.6 million a year just to keep our head above water with what our competitive peers are. That's very challenging for us to do. Putting aside the 4.2 million that VTSU is doing right now, is over a couple of years. They've been able to squirrel those funds away. From the legislature, we received somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6 in most years for deferred maintenance, so major maintenance and related activities. So it's challenging for us, and it's one of the reasons why, as we look ahead and we say, in order to build that bright future, in order to look at financial sustainability, we have to look at, have we sized our facilities appropriately for the size population and enrollment that we have? Because that deferred maintenance is a real bill that comes due. It's when you don't replace the roof, you have a problem. When you don't take care of replacing the windows, you have a problem. And we know that that can be the case. We very, very, very much prioritize your funds to go with the very highest priorities from a major maintenance perspective. Life-related activities, safety-related activities, things that extend the useful life of the building. But it is a challenge. So you're exactly right. And that is universal across all our campus locations. There is not a campus within the Vermont State Colleges that does not have a significant deferred maintenance portfolio. It's very much proportional to the size of their square footage.
So when you say right size, is the implication there that we're gonna either take buildings down or sell them to someone else?
When right sizing in higher education could be a wide variety of activities. It could be that you find a strategic partner who leases buildings. Perhaps there's an organization that's really closely aligned with the institution and the types of programs that they offer. Senator Ingalls noted Beta Technologies, for example. There could be a possibility that something might look like that. We've worked with institutions and systems across the Northeast who are looking at similar things. And so those public-private partnerships are some of the most critical things that could happen. It could be that you look to divest of a building through sale. You could potentially look, if the building is in such disrepair, that you could look at demolishing the building, though frankly, in my opinion, being the good Yankee that I am, that would be my very last choice. But that would be something else that we would consider. But our first step is really not about divestment. Our first step is really to understand what is it that our community needs? How do they feel about the existing buildings that we have? How well are they working for them today? We have people who are using these buildings every single day, faculty, staff, students. community members, and we need to understand how are they actually using them. It's one thing to look at it on a piece of paper and say, this building has X amount of deferred maintenance. It's another thing to hear from them and say, regardless of how much deferred maintenance on it, that building is so vital to the fabric of this campus that we couldn't possibly imagine being without it, and we would rather be without something else because it's so vital to maybe it was the founding building. I don't know that we have any founding buildings on our campuses right now, but maybe it's the founding building. Maybe it's where George Washington slept. But those are things that we need to understand, or that the students use because it's part of a ritual that they do every year on the opening day of school. But we need to understand many of those things, and we can only do that through the conversations that President Berg and his team will be having on campus with faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community. So we're looking forward to that input. But you're right, it could be a wide variety of things related to that.
So, go ahead. Go ahead, Brett.
Well,
Finish up.
yeah, okay. Just to show my partiality for Castleton's situation, I hope that the hockey rink, Spartan Arena remains, and all of the other athletic facilities there. I think that's a great calling card and an enhancement to attract students. I think if I saw the slide earlier, in terms of the 5 campuses, we're looking at somewhere around 3,900 students.
Living and attending classes on campus,
Yeah.
somewhere in that zone. So there are more students within Vermont State University, but what we counted here were the students who come and spend time on campus.
Yeah.
As opposed to students who take their classes largely online, or maybe they're a graduate student and they just come in for a couple hours a week.
Yeah.
And we did not include in that calculation individuals who might be doing workforce extension related courses, for example. I would say, I don't recall more, my husband would be horrified were we to get rid of the Spartan Arena as well, because he goes to hockey games there. I've heard a very similar statement from my own husband. So,
Good.
so it is, I don't think that our intent would be to get rid of anything that is actively in use. Any decisions that we would make would be in the context of not harming current students, not harming the institution itself, not harming the fabric and character of the organization. But no decisions have been made or will be made in the near future about the divestment activities without substantial conversation with our campus communities, because that is vital. That's how you learn that information. Again, someone might look and say, and Spartan Arena has lots of use, but let's say Spartan Arena was only used 10 days a year. But without having a conversation, you wouldn't understand what its true meaning was to the institution and to the campus or the community.
Thank you.
And then just some questions also about divestment. Obviously, we have a housing crisis, and I think I have heard anyway that there are dorm buildings that are not being used. So I hope that you'll have these conversations as quickly as possible, especially Johnson is really, they hurt from the storms from the flood.
Right.
So they can really use housing, and I would think that if you were going to divest of a building, that you want to do that sooner rather than later, so that the deferred maintenance doesn't increase.
Right. So one of the key elements that we will know is that occupancy of our residence halls is low. Even at its highest, which is at Castleton, it's only 73% occupancy in our residence halls. And in some of our other locations, it's as low as 20 to 25%. And so that does leave ourselves room. Now, part of that is some recent enrollment issues. We did have a big switch in this past year for VTSU to enroll a much higher proportion of Vermonters versus out-of-state students. As one might imagine, Vermonters tend to live a little closer to their campus locations, so they also tend to live at home. It's cheaper. I know when I went to college, I lived at home, and because it was less expensive for me to do so. Out-of-state students, because they're not within commuting radius, will live on campus at least their first couple of years. So those are some things that we know is happening. I am pleased to note that Vermont State University, their enrollment funnel for applications and admittances so far are looking very favorable for this coming fall. So we expect that will turn around. But will it turn around to the occupancy that we saw in 2010, which is when we had peak occupancy
And what
across
was
our
that?
system? We were at virtually 100% to even greater than 100% occupancy in 2010
At all of the campuses?
at all of their campus locations. And why was that? Because it was immediately following the 2008 recession.
Oh, and you were a
Right.
bargain.
And we were a bargain.
Yeah.
for many
Oh.
people.
Interesting. Well, I'm not gonna hope for another recession.
No, no one wants to vote for that, but we've also learned some things since then. Our students were seeing a much higher proportion of adult learners who are enrolled even at Vermont State University. That's historically been a very large component of the community college. But we're now seeing across all of our campus locations, a very high proportion of adult learners attending. Why is that for Vermonters specifically? Because our job market is so strong that you don't need immediately a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree to get your first job. You may dip your way in and out of education or you may choose to realize that after you turn 22, that you really do need that degree in order to be able to advance in your career. But what that means is it's a very different profile of students who are looking. And so in 2010, our average student across Vermont State University was in that 18 to 24-year-old range. And now we're seeing that range is quite a bit higher. And so that's going to lead to a different profile. And it's one of the reasons why, as we start to look at much of the data that's here, that the master planners have started to pull together, we look at the demographics and median age here in the state of Vermont, and what does that look like? But not only Vermont, New England and the Northeast, because we draw out-of-state students. The vast majority of our students we draw within 500 miles. So we're really looking at the Northeast here for the most part. There are other students, and those students are very successful when they come here, and it does mean changing some enrollment strategies. But will we see that peak enrollment across all our campuses in terms of residential? Maybe not, because most of higher education, especially in the Northeast, is seeing a similar trend. The very selective publics and the very selective privates are still doing just fine. Harvard's are doing fine, and the Yales, et cetera. But for many of us, it's that struggle, particularly when the job market is strong. But no one wants a recession. So
Right.
I don't want that.
No, so when will you know or be ready to divest of things?
I'm not ready to say.
Or when will the plan be finished?
So we're working on that right now, and we're hoping that it'll be later this year. And when exactly, we do want some content available so that we can start doing some estimating. But I don't know that it'll be the full plan for a while yet. And I think that's because as we continue to work with our communities on the implementation of the academic optimization plans, and they continue to work on their enrollment strategy and enrollment plans, we really need to make sure that the master plan does not get ahead of it. We don't want the tail wagging the dog in this particular instance. We do not want the master plan to get ahead of the academic plan and to get ahead of the enrollment plan.
Right.
Which is very easy to do. It's very easy for us because those of us who work with facilities, we are hard chargers and we get stuff done.
Right, well,
And so we wanna make sure that we avoid that.
yeah, it's just hard to see, like dormitories especially being empty, like, for example, at SAT, they're housing refugees now. And the dorms actually work really well.
Right.
You have to upgrade the kitchens a little bit,
Right,
but those are just so valuable and.
right.
Well, sometimes you have to be careful about the partnerships you get into too as well, so
Of course,
you just have to be
but
very, very
empty
careful.
buildings,
Right, so we
But it
have,
doesn't always mean that's the right fit to do the mission that other people might have in mind, so.
I understand.
so in terms of
Yeah.
short-term things that we have done, we have built partnerships at both the Johnson and the Randolph communities in the past. I don't know if they're currently active to provide housing for visiting nurses.
Okay,
Because-
that's good.
Because that's a struggle. This is a struggle
Right.
when you bring a visiting nurse in. They're
Right.
only here for a 2-month contract or a 3-month contract. And it's already hard to find housing. We partnered last winter with Smugglers Notch to provide housing for their H1 students. So the individuals who came in as seasonal employees for Smugglers, because they did not have the space locally to be able to deal with that. nor do they have the space.
Oh, that's good.
It's Notch itself.
Good.
So we are looking for opportunities as much as possible to be able to do that. We've also taken advantage where we can to provide housing for our faculty and staff who
That's
who
great,
also
yeah.
struggle.
Right,
So we're not leaving the buildings idle.
good.
They are not fully occupied, and they're not occupied to the extent we would like them to be, but we are not leaving them fully
Good,
occupied.
okay, that's what,
And largely because leaving a building dormant in Vermont,
it's terrible.
it's terrible.
Right.
Like the state of Vermont is awful for buildings that
Right.
way.
And then just one last question, just with that map, there's kind of an obvious gap on the lower right
Mhm.
side. How did that gap happen? And you can tell me later if that's,
The gap in terms of
there's
population.
nothing in southeast Vermont. I mean, there's a little tiny triangle that is CCV.
Right, there's so there's CCV and then, we do have I think we have a nursing site co-located with CCV in that.
Right, but how did that happen historically? Like, was there
So,
something else
just,
there?
just as a quick background, the primary locations for the Vermont State Colleges, Linden, Johnson, Castleton, were all funded as, teachers' colleges, normal schools.
Okay,
And so, some as early as, late 1785 for Castleton, 1867 for Johnson, 1911 for Linden. And then, shortly after that, the State Agricultural College was created for, and that was founded in Randolph. So those were the locations that were established, but primarily established as normal schools. So for teacher training preparation, and then the Ag College was placed smack dab in the center of the state as kind of the easiest place to get our farmers to for really getting education. And so that's why they're in those locations. It was not by design.
it's just interesting.
Right.
Like, I didn't know if there was some assumption made or there was some educational facility there
No,
years ago.
no, not to the best of my knowledge. Those
Okay.
locations, we did move CCV into locations on both sides of the lower part of the state, and we have nursing co-located with them as well, both for the Castleton RN program as well as the Randolph-based laddered credential program, because those are important programs for us to be able to extend throughout the body of the state. But it was not by design. There's really happens to be sort of this historical artifact.
Hmm.
Has it ever been tried ever as far as, flexibility as far as in having daycare, like at an evening? So as some of these, there's people that have made mistakes early on in life and decided that either they didn't plan to do their education, or they just got involved in life way too early and then figured out how important it was to have education later and had young families, and maybe they worked, maybe they didn't, but still you have young families. Has it ever been tried to have any type of daycare so that people could go to college?
Yes, at the Johnson location specifically, in the early 1970s, they created what they termed married student housing. And they were family housing that was intended very purposefully for individuals coming out on the GI Bill, largely, but also those who were seeking to return for education. Located also on that campus was a childcare center that was owned and operated by the then Johnson State College. That operated from the late 1960s, early 1970s until around 2008, 2009.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the college needed to close it because it was losing about $200,000 a year.
Yeah.
And it was something that, while it was an incredible service to the community, it was the highest level of childcare center that you can be according to state regulations. It was a wonderful program, but it was not affordable for us to be able to operate.
Right.
And so we did end up closing it. On the Linden campus specifically, the Linden campus did not have its own childcare center, but for many, many years at the base of the hill for Linden State College at that time, there was a building that was a childcare center. It was privately owned and operated, but because it was essentially on campus. It was really viewed as a campus facility by many, especially students. We would love as much as possible to partner with private providers to
Right.
provide childcare. Childcare is an essential service, and we know that it is absolutely vital to the ability for people to be able to attend classes. And in fact, as part of the workforce development program that was funded under ARPA, that the legislature approved, we offered wraparound services at both the Community College of Vermont and Vermont State University campuses, where we offered support to individuals to help pay for childcare when they needed to take a class or study. And do other things, as well as other wraparound services, like provide them with the technology that they needed to be successful in the class. Maybe it was gas money for them to get to class. Because we found that in many cases, having access to some of those ready funds was really important, but not nearly as important as what you know, which is having access to high quality childcare. Because it's essential.
Anything else? Well, stay viable, stay flexible, stay creative. And from one Yankee to another, don't tear those buildings down, because you're gonna tell them.
Well, that is our greatest. That is our greatest. So thank you so much for having.
Thank you for being for the transparency. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear some new, more great news.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Have a